Hello, everyone. In today's episode, I have Nermeen joining me from the Lego Group. Nermeen is currently a tech program manager, and she's also the co founder of With Purpose, which is supporting women entrepreneurs to start, run, and grow their own companies. She's also the founder of Hello Ada, which is aiming to help increase diversity in technology. Nermeen has a very inspiring story, and now with her work, she keeps inspiring others and making sure that the future of tech is diverse. We'll be talking about biases and ethical implications of deploying AI in companies, as well as the topic of diversity. Hello, Nermeen. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good as well. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us to have this conversation. I'm so excited about all the things that we can talk about because I see that you've been very active in different fields of AI. So before going deeper, I will just start by asking you to tell us a bit more about yourself and your journey in the world of AI.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, first of all. It's super cool to participate in this. I think I ended up in the AI field a little bit by accident. I have always been a little bit of a hybrid between design and technology and soft skills and hard skills and just the idea of stories and science. So actually, I did first a bachelor's in communication IT in University of Copenhagen, and I did it because I wanted just to actually work with game programming and films, and I loved the idea of combining technology with films. And then when I got into degree, I got introduced to AI or the concept of machine learning first by my teachers, and I was like, oh, that sounds super interesting. The idea of like something abstract learning and continuing to learn and getting intelligence through us. I think that was super cool. So I went on to specialize in that in Hong Kong and also did a master's degree in that in human-centered artificial intelligence at the Technical University of Denmark. And then I've been working with AI and human-computer interactions ever since at Microsoft, Jabra, and now the Lego Group. And then I also, because it's super important to keep propagating the interest in AI and technology, I also have initiative called Hello Ada, which is a place for parents to discover all cool initiatives about getting more intrigued about technology and also how to start your tech career a little bit younger than before you start into university. So you get to work with block programming or AI concepts before. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's so interesting. I saw that initiative and I thought it was great. And I really liked how you mentioned, I think in one of your posts I saw it, where education really starts within the family. And I think that's really true. That's where you start getting inspired, you start getting the first idea. So that's very interesting. So
Definitely. I think related to that, I think a lot of studies shows, especially in Denmark, I don't know the numbers for the rest of Europe or for the rest of the world, but a lot of parents' ideas and concepts of the world obviously get translated to your kids because I think your first teacher actually in life is your parent. And if your parent has a view of the world that says that STEM is for boys or STEM is not something that my dear daughter can go into because it's not something that involves other human beings, that is the idea that you as a girl will get. And that's also why we want to show that it's more whimsical than that. And it's a little bit more fun than just sitting in a basement eating pizza, that there's more to technology and AI than the stereotypical image we get from media.
it's really true. That makes me think for people, for kids in general, it starts in the family. And thinking of our role as AI Academy and what we're doing as well, I always ask myself, where does it start in a company? So it's very hard to identify because within the family, it's the first impression that you get. If you have parents who have the knowledge, who have the awareness of the new technology, they already start introducing you to new things. But within the companies, I see that a bit more difficult. Maybe speaking of Lego, where do you think it starts at Lego, the first awareness when it comes to the technologies?
Well, I think there's a general effort of trying to foster culture of ethical awareness, first of all, that obviously entails how is it that we also introduce new technologies, because I think you need to have like a pretty good baseline of like what are we comfortable also interacting with before we start talking about what technologies we let into the company and we let into either our ways of working or into the actual products that we create. So I think at the Lego Group, I think it's a generally a pretty natural thing where I think from employees to employees, we talk about the technologies, right? We all are avid learners and want to see how the world evolves. And obviously, with the rise of AI, I think a lot of focus has been on how can we optimize our products, how can we make them better, whether it's AI-driven customization or enhancing our content moderation for AI, or just optimizing our supply chain management. All of that allows opportunities to use AI, but I think around that and before that, I think there's a really big effort of creating a culture where we are aware that every time we decide to use the technology, we also are bringing uncertainty in with us. And uncertainty puts our users at risk because there's privacy issues around it, right? Or there's also just what is your data being used for? If we cannot answer that, how is our customers going to be able to feel comfortable sharing that data with us? So I think obviously we have a very open culture where we talk about new technologies and how we want to integrate with them, but we have a really big focus on creating a culture around where we are aware first of how ethics go around it, but also before we even introduce new technology at the Lego Group, we really try to do transparent and responsible data practices. So I think that's something I and everyone in the company are working a lot on right now. Is like, how can we ensure that we implement technologies and processes that allows for transparent data collection and uses practices, and how is it that we can introduce AI systems or other technologies in that use and process data in a way that we feel portrays the value of the company? Because at the end of the day, the Lego Group is, even though we have adults as customers, it's mainly families and kids, and therefore we have a bigger responsibility to protect their rights, because you're at an age, especially the kids, where you can't give consent by themselves, right? So we should not misuse that data.
No, that's true. I've been talking to a couple of people where in Lego right now, including you, and I see a lot of that culture within the employees as well. So that's really good. But talking about companies in general, what I see a lot when I discuss with companies is most of them don't really know where to start when it comes to AI. And I feel like that also comes from not being able to identify the risks, because it's something that we spoke a lot with the Gianluca on the first episode as well. We talked about the importance of identifying the risks before getting started with projects, because not knowing them sometimes keep people from moving forward, from coming up with a project or starting it. So most of these risks are also are related to concerns about privacy, biases, and ethical implications, as you mentioned. And I wanted to ask you how you think companies can approach the challenges to ensure responsible and ethical AI development.
I think the first solution, and I would say that is for every challenge that we are faced with, is to ensure you have the right team working on it. And I think the right team in this case, but I think the right team is having a multidisciplinary team that has enough diversity, both in terms of do you represent the society you're building for, but also in terms of we need to involve both ethicists, legal experts, technologists in addressing those challenges. This is not something an engineer only is going to talk about. It's not something just the upper management can address. Is something that a multidisciplinary team and a diverse team needs to be involved in, because I think to oversee these AI projects and also to just to get the best solutions and approaching those challenges, you need to see the solutions from different perspectives and see where is it that it becomes a problem. Because if you ask a legal expert, they know what the challenges are, but you will not be seen in the same way as a product manager or the CEO, right? Because there it's a little bit of different focus. And I think that's nice and it's okay. But I think if we don't put them all in the same room and actually make them work together, then we're never really going to be able to see and identify all the challenges. So I think that is the first thing. And then obviously talking and communicating about it regularly. I think it's super important to have processes or touch points where you have regular audits or impact assessments, just to ensure that you're compliant with what you identify as your values in terms of technology, right? Because I think each company can decide how is it that you feel comfortable using and sharing this use of technology, whether it's AI or something else. But it's also ensure that you are compliant with the guidelines that you yourself have put yourself up to. And you can only do that if you touch base. A little bit how we do KPIs and OKRs in some companies, and touch base, hey, did we get enough profits? We should do the same thing about how we measure if we have adhered to all the values and all the guidelines that we want to be doing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And to be able to measure these things, we need to be also able to identify them. So what I find really interesting is, how do you identify bias in an AI product or in an AI project?
Now I'm going to give you some really easy, digestible examples. But for example, with Google Translate, when you had the issue of not being able to represent women enough in certain data sets, when they came out with the Google Draw experiment, which was an AI experiment where basically they give you a prompt and then they ask the user to draw something, and then you say, yes, you did it, it's correct, or does your doodle look like what we told you to draw? In that case, I think there was an experiment or like a use case where someone, or a woman actually, got the prompt shoe, and then she drew a high heel. And a high heel is a shoe for a lot of women, and also for other people. And the data had not, the algorithm had not registered that and said it was wrong, that it was a water slide, and that she had drawn a water slide because it didn't have any data on high heels as shoes, because there was not a diverse team, and therefore it was mostly men, and he just had the data that was around the office. So obviously he didn't have any high heels in the office when you were training the algorithm, and therefore there was an issue of representation. So it's a very small use case, but because we didn't represent the woman in the data, then the high heel was no longer considered a shoe by this algorithm. And that's a small use case. But if you look at the medical field, the fact that we don't represent enough women or enough also people of color, a lot of skin conditions, for example, is where we use AI algorithms to detect them, don't misdiagnose the patients because they are not trained on women. I don't understand that we are not made the same way. So I think lack of representation is super harmful. And then also material harm. I think everyone knows the classic Amazon's hiring software and April cart selection, where people that were in certain categories want to give them loans because the data was just biased. And the Amazon hiring software, because the history of applicants that had got hired were mostly men, they also just assumed men were just preferred for the job, so you were also not given a position. And that is a material harm, right? Because if you're not able to get a job or not able to get a loan because of biased data, then it's actually impacting your physical life, right? So I think these are two areas, and I think if you use a good ethical AI framework and actually look at the fairness, accountability, the transparency, and the privacy concerns, try to quantify them and see what you're comfortable with, I think you're able to put key results on what you would not want to happen in terms of biased data.
Yeah, no, that's very valuable. Thank you so much. That's very interesting. I think coming back to what I said about companies kind of being hesitant about starting or about pushing AI projects internally because of that is also around the fact of not knowing how to identify the built-in biases. And then you hear these case studies as horror stories of a company used AI and then there was bias in the data and it caused a lot of problems. So that creates a lot of fear. How do you think companies in general can avoid problems like built-in biases? I mean, you already mentioned this framework, but where should they start?
I think even before you start the framework, I think you should have as a goal as a company to ensure that your data sets are diverse as possible. And always question, are we having a data set that represents the target group that we're talking about? Whether it's if you're building a product for a society, then is it representing the society that we live in? I think that you can quickly answer. It's not really rocket science. I think you can quickly see if your data set is diverse or not. And if it's not, you should be transparent about it. I think, for example, when OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, they were very open in the beginning about that this was research purposes and it's not perfect. Obviously, there was a lot of cases of bias that came out through it, and it showed the shortcomings of AI, but at least you were honest and transparent about it from the beginning. So it's really hard to question that because you're very honest about it. So I think it's super important to ensure that your data set is important, and to be transparent where it's not diverse, whether it's because of lack of resources or it's lack of monetary support to be able to get, because it is expensive to get a very diverse data set, right? And especially when it comes to AI, because I think it is expensive to get a representative amount of data that allows you to do some really good insights. And then I think, again, as I said in the beginning, I think diversity of thought is so important in that process. So involving different disciplines, but also involving stakeholders from different backgrounds in the development process. That's also why I think as we go along, ensuring that your teams are created in a way where both product managers, designers, developers, and legal experts, as well as ethicists, actually on a regular basis talk. I think you should be as close as you can to the development process to make sure that things are detected as we go and not after the product is launched into the market, because then it becomes harder to actually do something about it. So I think it's just about we're really enamored with the word agile and like creating dependent teams that can work by themselves and all that, which is really nice, because I think we're going towards also a way where we're making them so interdisciplinary that you can run by themselves, the teams, at least the development teams. And I think as a company, you should rethink also how you build your team so that also legal experts and ethicists are also part of the development team, so that you know that it's transparent and also ethically viable at that level, because AI is not just, it's not ChatGPT, it's not the final product only, it's a multiple amount of small systems that all integrate and communicate with each other. So it has to happen at that smaller little component level before we start looking at the bigger model. So I think that, and then also obviously I think setting up a system for continuous monitoring and updating of AI systems, I think we need to keep building, learning, and iterating on it and seeing, hey, like I love how ChatGPT has actually talked about it. You always keep learning and update their systems so you can see that you get better with it. And I think Google is better at it now, but I think for a very long time, I think you would just kind of leave the product out into the market, and then a lot of people would see the bias, and then 2 years later, you would come with a new version, or you would remove the older version if there was too much hate coming through. But I think you need to create a system where you can constantly release, hey, we're learning, a little bit like when you're having a conversation with another human being. You don't sit 2 hours later and think about, oh, I don't know if I agree or don't agree. You make that decision in the process. And I think we should be a little bit more reactive to changes and to demands from the users, right? And then I think the last thing, as a company, I think UX is already a really big thing, but user feedback should become more and more important, I think, going forward, because users will be interacting with that technology, and to make something ethically compliant and responsible, you need to listen to the people that actually are part of defining those ethical values that you should adhere to.
That's true. Also, I feel like that comes with the responsibility of including more people in AI as well, because I know from my own experience where I have a background in international relations, so I don't have any technical background, and I always saw AI as a very technical field where I couldn't just join or I couldn't intervene. I was very interested in it, but I thought it was more like I can read an article on it when I want to, and that's it. It just felt really far away. But now I see how people coming from different domains, different backgrounds are the ones that are going to consider the ethical implications, the biases, how to regulate this technology. These don't come from developers. Shouldn't as well. I always say, like, we're all different because we're supposed to collaborate on things. That's when we can create great value. So that was a very good point. And within Lego, how are there any initiatives or any frameworks that you're following to make sure that you're not facing similar situations and problems?
I think we have a lot of data privacy measures that are really tightly put together with all of the product teams, so we follow those. And I think there's a lot of ethical AI guidelines. There's an AI committee that also overviews those. And then we are collaborating with a lot of experts, both from the academic industry or like the academia, but also just with legal experts. I think in general, there's a really big effort on that, and there's a lot of small processes that are put in place within each product team to ensure that we are compliant with both ethical and legal regulations. So I think that's a really big part of how we work at the Lego Group.
Okay. And what kind of advices would you give other companies in terms of navigating the ethical challenges and contributing to a more diverse, inclusive AI landscape? A company that has never worked on it yet, what should they do?
I think before I go completely into the recommendations, I think it's also a little bit inspired by a conversation I had with Gianluca. I think in the last few years, I think since really technology started really like moving faster, we have really focused on R&D becoming something that we need to react fast, right? I think when ChatGPT came out, people were like, oh, now we all have to release AI solutions, and now we all have to integrate AI into a solution, which is really nice because I think there's this hunger for knowledge and hunger for innovating. But I think, as you said before, and I think as we both agree on, I think it's super important that we get a diversity of thoughts and diversity of minds with us in the process, which also means that we will have to onboard people that are not as comfortable or has not been approached by the concepts of technology and AI and all of these things yet. You're still getting onboarded. A lot of these people are experts in legal matters or in ethics, and for the first time being asked to reflect on how do you think about AI and how do you think about technology and R&D innovations. And to do that, we need to be moving a little bit slower, because I think we are moving so fast, and yet we're saying we need everyone to be on board and to help us create more ethical solutions. Yet we're not leaving any space or time to onboard these new disciplines to help us create better solutions. So it's like we're running and asking you to run with us and also learn how to walk at the same time. So, yeah. And that doesn't make sense. It's impossible to do that. And of course, disciplines that are new to this wave will fall behind and will constantly fail in the process because you're learning to walk and run at the same time. And we're not giving them the opportunity to learn to walk first, because we're like, no, you have to run because we're running and we have to build a new wave and we have new things that we want to implement AI into every industry, right? So it's like governments are trying to create regulations as we are moving faster and faster with AI. And that is being inconsiderate, first of all, but also from another standpoint, is as if we're setting them up for failure. We're setting ourselves up for failure, right? So I think that is the first thing I would love every company to consider is if you generally have ethics as part of your agenda, then you have to revisit how you want your roadmaps and timelines to look at, because it will require you to go a bit slower, which will maybe have an impact on your profits and how you build your business. But it will have a better outcome, but it will require you to make that standpoint and decide to maybe do something that not all other companies do, which is to go slower, which is not something that we are very used to, at least in the tech industry, because with, I think when Facebook and all those companies started up, it was like move fast and break things, right? And now we're asking people to actually move responsibly and don't leave anyone behind, which is a completely different way of seeing the world and a different mindset. So I think it is a little bit of, you have to choose to do things differently, which is already like getting out of their comfort zone as a company, right? Because you're measured on how much profit you make. And then another thing is to be comfortable with things going a bit slower and not doing things the same way as all the big tech companies that we admire are doing. So I think that's the first thing. And I think to repeat a little bit what I said, I think it's super important to establish an AI framework. What is it that is ethical for you? Because ethics is so much. I think we all have a different definition. And I think it's super important to revisit what is it that you define as that, and what is it the values of the company you are working in feel comfortable working towards. Because I think in some cases it's harder to create as much transparency and privacy because you're working in a medical field, right? There you have to be a little bit more compliant than if I'm working in a muffin company, right? So it's like different elements in different companies. And then I will always have like a feedback loop and an iterate loop. So always like implement regular audits and impact assessments, just see how things are going, and if things going well, do we need to revisit the metrics that we're looking at? And again, as we said before, engage in diverse recruitment and training. And like training is really important. Like we need to train these people to be able to be the best versions of themselves in that job, right? And it is a learning curve, and some people are just more ahead, and we need to get people on the same level. And then involve stakeholders development process. I think we need to get out of this. The product managers deal with the product and selling it, and engineers just build the whole thing and designers just send some design to engineers. I think we cannot work in silos anymore. AI is just so deeply integrated. It's like electricity. We need to be collaborating much more and communicating much more. Everyone needs to be aware of what you're implementing, which means that we need to talk more. And then I think collaborating, learning from others. I think until now we have had a big focus on obviously in a world where patents and having a unique special element to your company is super important. I think a lot of people keep things in and don't really want to share out. I think it's super important to collaborate with industry experts and policymakers and talk with academia and see what are things, because you might not in your company have the best solution for what you want to create, but it might be something that the local forum or conference or the local university maybe has done. So I think it's also important to collaborate and learn from others if you have a system or setup that allows for that. So I think those are my recommendations.
Absolutely. That was great. I think this should be in the agenda for each company that is considering creating a product with AI or just pushing AI projects internally. One point that I wanted to clarify a bit is when we talk about going a bit slower, I always, so you gave a great example of Google having the AI product out, and then after having all the feedback 2 years after, maybe fixing that problem. But in that 2 years, the harm is done. So that's very hard to take back, right? So what I'm thinking is maybe when we mean go slower, we mean going slower with the deployment. Because I think the biggest difference of this technology from any other technology is the scale of it. Because when something causes harm, it causes harm to millions of people in one day. It's just very fast, very difficult to control. But at the same time, to be able to solve these problems, we need to do a lot more research. We need to learn more, inform ourselves a bit more. So I think it's also about finding that balance in between. Until when do we continue with the research, and when do we feel comfortable deploying the solution to the world? And we know that we're not going to be causing harm to a lot of different groups. So yeah, that's something that I find very difficult for companies to also decide on.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. I think we've learned from a young age to think before we speak, and yet we don't think before we deploy, which is very funny because it is making a statement, right? And then I think we can all get inspired a little bit by the medical fields. I think you think 3 times or 10 times more before you deploy anything, because they realize that there's human lives impacted. But I think we don't realize it in all companies in the same way, because we're like, oh, well, I'm not creating something that is life endangering. But I think as we go back a little bit to our conversation at the beginning, there is representational and material harm done to humans because of the AI solutions that we create, and therefore we should think before we release things, because it is creating harm. So I think it is something to keep in mind. I just think sometimes we don't realize what harm we're creating, and because we're working on a small component each, like no one works on the actual big product, and therefore you don't have that same empathy and same understanding of what is it that's happening with our product.
Yeah. When it comes to that, this is a difficult question that we probably don't have an answer to, but I'm wondering what you think about it. Who is responsible in driving this forward? As everyone works in their components, who is the person who needs to think about this within a company?
Well, I think everyone. I think this is something that if it's not shared by the entire company, if we don't have a culture where everyone hold themselves, first of all, accountable, and also puts you ask you to take responsibility for ensuring that there's ethical awareness, first of all, but also ethical action towards creating products that's more responsible, then nothing will happen, right? Because even if the CEO says, hey, you have to do this, you can end up sitting by yourself in a development team, and your CEO doesn't know what you're working on, and you can just stay and oh, well, I need to move fast, so I will just do it this way. I think it is everyone's responsibility. I think creating that environment where we all think about ethics first, just like we all are so good at thinking about privacy first, but we don't think about ethics in the same manner, right? Because I think we all understand what privacy entails because we all are aware of how it impacts us, right? But I think we need to understand that as all of us are part of shaping AI, but we also all part of, we also are consumers and customers of it. And therefore, every time you don't think responsibly about how AI is produced, you're also going to be hit by it later. So I think if people realize that you're going to end up tasting your own medicine at the end, like, then I think people will understand a little bit. I think what you're letting go of in terms of ethics in your own company is going to bite you later. So I think if we don't create an environment around it, no one is going to be able to hold each other accountable.
Yeah, no, that's a very good message to leave everyone with. I think when you say it that way, it creates that effect, because these are the things that we all know of, but we need to also take the time to think about it, to really understand what this technology means to us and how can we contribute in making it more diverse, making it more ethical. So that was a very good message to, I think, close with, seeing the time as well. Nermeen, thank you so much for joining. It was such a pleasure to have you here and talk about these ethical implications and the diversity topics when it comes to AI. And thank you so much for making the time for it.
No worries. Thank you so much for inviting me.